Prologue. The sea that does not forgive. There are stories that people have told one another for thousands of years, not because they contain magic or wonders, though they do. Not because they contain gods and monsters, though those are there too. But because these stories contain something more important, a man who wants to go home. Simply home. To his wife, to his son, to his land, to his bed. To the smell of his own hearth, to the sound of a familiar voice, to the feeling of being, at last, where he belongs. One would think, what could be simpler? Take a ship, raise a sail, sail home. But sometimes fate decides otherwise. Sometimes, between a man and his home, stands the whole of the sea, all the gods, and all the monsters of the world. This is the story of Odysseus, king of the small island of Ithaca, most cunning of men, beloved of the goddess of wisdom, and enemy of the god of the seas. It is a story of 10 years of war, and 10 years of journeying home. Of 20 years in which a man can grow old, break down, forget who he is. But Odysseus did not forget. That is the whole story. Part 1. The Trojan War and its Price. Chapter 1. The Man Who Did Not Want to Go to War. When in distant Egypt the pharaohs were building their pyramids, and in young Greece the first cities were only beginning to take shape, on the shore of a gleaming blue sea stood mighty Troy, a wealthy city with high walls, with towers reaching to the sky, with merchant ships plying every sea. The war began over a woman, as often happens in stories about men who consider themselves very clever. Beautiful Helen, wife of the Spartan king Menelaus, had been taken by the Trojan prince Paris, or had gone willingly. It depended on whom you asked. But Menelaus decided this was cause for war, and all the Greek kings agreed. Some from loyalty, some from hunger for plunder, some simply because it was awkward to refuse. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, did not wish to refuse for a different reason. His young wife Penelope had just given birth to a son. Little Telemachus lay in his cradle and looked at the world with wondering eyes. Odysseus looked at his son and felt his heart tighten. He did not want to go to war. He tried to feign madness. He yoked an ox and a donkey to one plow and began to plow his field and sow salt into the furrows. The Greek envoys watched with interest. Then one of them, the cunning Palamedes, took little Telemachus and placed him directly in the path of the plow. Odysseus instantly stopped the team. A madman would not have protected a child. "So you are sane," said Palamedes, "and you are coming to war." Odysseus looked at him with a long gaze. Palamedes remembered that look and regretted it later. But that is another story. Odysseus kissed Penelope, lifted Telemachus, felt his slight weight, said something. Exactly what, history did not preserve. Perhaps he said nothing. Sometimes the most important things are spoken in silence. And he sailed off to war. Chapter 2. 10 years before the walls of Troy. Troy did not fall. 10 years. Imagine. 10 years, camped on the shores of a foreign sea, eating a soldier's food, sleeping in a tent, listening to the waves at night, and thinking of home. In that time, little Telemachus had grown into a boy. Penelope waited. Odysseus's aged father, Laertes, grew older still. And Troy stood. It had high walls, good warriors, and patron gods. The Greeks suffered losses. The greatest heroes fell one after another. Mighty Ajax, beautiful Achilles, killed by Paris's arrow in the one vulnerable place. Odysseus fought differently. He was not the strongest or the fastest, but he was the most cunning. In scouting, in negotiations, in complex operations requiring wit more than force, he was indispensable. And it was he who conceived the idea that finally decided the outcome of the war: the wooden horse. The Greeks announced a retreat. The ships disappeared over the horizon. One thing remained on the shore: an enormous wooden horse, supposedly dedicated to the gods. The Trojans cautiously emerged from their walls. They surveyed the shore. They found the horse. It is a gift, some decided. We must bring it into the city. It is a trap, others said. We must burn it. The priest Laocoon hurled his spear at the horse and cried out, "Do not trust the Greeks, especially when they bring gifts." But the gods, who desired Troy's destruction, sent 2 enormous sea serpents, which strangled the priest along with his sons. This was taken as a sign. The horse was dragged into the city. That night, as Troy feasted its victory and fell into a drunken, joyful sleep, Greek warriors crept out from the horse's belly. Among them, Odysseus. They opened the gates. The fleet returned. By morning, Troy was burning. The war was won. But the gods did not forgive the Greeks for their desecration of Troy's sacred places, and the journey home became a trial that few survived. Odysseus did not know then that his trial would be the longest of all. Chapter 3. The Wrath of Poseidon. Odysseus had angered a god. It did not happen all at once, not in a single day, but the result was the same. Poseidon, god of the sea, immense, blue-bearded, with a trident in his hand, whose voice was the thunder of waves and the creak of ships' masts, came to hate Odysseus. The reason was his son. The one-eyed giant Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, had been blinded by Odysseus. But that comes a little later. First, the beginning of the journey. Odysseus sailed from beneath the smoking ruins of Troy with 12 ships. On board, his faithful men, companions in arms, warriors who had served beside him through 10 years of war. Ahead, the sea, and beyond it, Ithaca. Home. It seemed only a short voyage, a few weeks with a good wind. But a good wind is something the gods decide, and the gods had already decided. Part 2. The Cyclops and his father. Chapter 4. The Island of Giants. The first adventures were not the most terrible. A storm had driven the ships to the island of the Cicones, and there the Greeks did what soldiers of every age have always done. They plundered a village, feasted, and set no watch in the night. The Cicones returned with reinforcements. Odysseus lost several men and barely escaped. Then, the land of the lotus eaters, people who eat the flowers of the lotus, which grant forgetfulness. Several sailors tried the lotus and forgot Ithaca, forgot their wives, forgot their children. They wished to stay forever on the island of blissful idleness. Odysseus dragged them back to the ships by force, bound them until the stupor passed. "We must not forget," he said, "while we remember. We are alive." And then came the island of the Cyclopes. They landed at night. The island seemed uninhabited, wild, with goat tracks, with caves in the cliffs. One cave held stores of cheese and pens of young goats. The sailors wanted to take the supplies and leave. Odysseus wanted to stay, to see who lived here. This was a mistake. The cave's master returned at evening. He was enormous. So enormous that when he rolled a great boulder across the cave entrance, the earth shook. One eye in the middle of his forehead. A voice like a mountain avalanche. This was Polyphemus, son of Poseidon. "Who are you?" he thundered, lighting a torch. "We are Greeks, travelers," answered Odysseus. "We ask for hospitality in the name of Zeus, who watches over wanderers." "Zeus?" Polyphemus laughed. "I care nothing for Zeus. We Cyclopes have our own gods. And what hospitality do you ask of me?" "Simply let us leave in peace in the morning." Polyphemus answered otherwise. He seized 2 sailors, dashed them against the rock, and ate them. Then blocked the entrance and lay down to sleep. Odysseus could have killed him in the night. He had a sword. But killing the Cyclops was impossible, for then no one could move the boulder from the entrance, and they would be trapped in the cave forever. Cunning was needed. In the morning, while Polyphemus was out grazing his goats, Odysseus found in the cave an enormous wooden club, hewn from an olive tree. They sharpened one end and hid it in the dung. And then they waited. That evening the Cyclops returned. Again he ate 2 men. "What is your name?" Polyphemus asked when he had eaten his fill. "Nobody," answered Odysseus calmly. "My name is Nobody." "Nobody," laughed the Cyclops. "A fine name. I shall eat you last, Nobody. That will be my gift to you." Odysseus brought the Cyclops a large bowl of strong wine taken from the ship. Polyphemus drank with pleasure. Then more again. He did not know what wine was. The Cyclopes had none. And the potency of the unfamiliar drink struck him quickly. The giant toppled over and began to snore. Odysseus pulled the club from the dung, heated its tip in the embers, and drove it into the Cyclops' single eye. Polyphemus' scream awoke all the neighboring Cyclopes. They came running to the cave. "Polyphemus! What happened? Who has hurt you?" "Nobody," the Cyclops bellowed. "Nobody is killing me. Well, if nobody has hurt you, then it must be the will of the gods," the neighbors concluded, and went home. In the morning, the blinded Polyphemus rolled back the boulder to let his goats out to pasture. He sat at the entrance, feeling each goat as it passed, to prevent any men from escaping with them. Odysseus had tied his men beneath the bellies of the goats, 1 man beneath each. He himself clung beneath the largest ram. The goats went out one by one. Polyphemus felt along their backs, but not beneath. When they were free, Odysseus could not restrain himself. Already sailing from the shore, he shouted back to the Cyclops. It was not Nobody. It was Odysseus of Ithaca, son of Laertes. It was pride. Human, understandable, but fatal. Polyphemus raised his enormous hands to the sky. "Father, Poseidon, do you hear? Odysseus of Ithaca has blinded me. Punish him. Let him wander long. Let him lose all his men. Let him come home on a stranger ship." Poseidon heard. Part 3. The Island of Winds and the Land of the Dead. Chapter 5. Aeolus and His Bag. After the Cyclops, the path led them to the island of Aeolus, lord of the winds, favorite of the gods. It was an enchanted island, floating on the sea upon bronze walls. There Odysseus spent a month, feasting with Aeolus, telling him of Troy, listening to stories. Aeolus received him well. When the time came to leave, Aeolus gave him a gift. He had caught all the unfavorable winds and sealed them in a leather bag. He gave the bag to Odysseus. "Tie it fast," he said. "Do not open it. The west wind will carry you to Ithaca by itself." For 9 days they sailed. 9 days and 9 nights, Odysseus stood at the helm himself, not sleeping, not allowing himself to relax. Ithaca was drawing near. On the 10th day, he saw the familiar shores on the horizon and finally fell asleep. Deeply, as a man sleeps who has not slept for many nights. And here, the sailors, who had spent all this time eyeing the bag and thinking it must certainly contain gold that Odysseus intended to keep for himself, untied the bag. All the winds burst free at once. The storm seized the ships, and in a matter of hours drove them back to the island of Aeolus. Odysseus woke, saw what had happened, and sat in silence for a long time. Then he returned to Aeolus. "Help us again?" he asked. Aeolus looked at him. "No," he said. "You are clearly hateful to the gods. I will not help one whom the gods pursue." Odysseus left. Chapter 6. The Laestrygonians and Circe. The next stop cost him 11 ships out of 12. The land of the Laestrygonians, giant cannibals, looked peaceful. A quiet harbor, high cliffs. Odysseus, by his habitual caution, anchored his own ship at the harbor entrance outside. The remaining 11 ships entered within. The Laestrygonians attacked without warning. Enormous rocks rained down from the cliff tops. The ships in the enclosed harbor could not maneuver. Men were killed and eaten. Within minutes, 11 ships had sunk with their crews. Odysseus alone broke free. His ship was anchored outside. He cut the cables, shouted at the oarsmen, drove the ship forward without looking back. Now there was one ship, and grief. Such grief as is hard to express in words. Hundreds of men who had survived Troy drowned or were devoured before his eyes. He put in at the shore of the island of Aeaea. He ordered his men to rest. He himself climbed a hill to look around. From the hill, he saw smoke rising from the chimney of a great house in the forest. He sent half his men to investigate. The other half he left with the ship. The scouts found a palace in the forest, beautiful, of cut stone, surrounded by a fence, before which wolves and lions lay and moved about. Strange wolves and lions. They did not growl or attack, but wagged their tails like dogs. From the palace came a woman, beautiful, with a voice like silver bells. She invited them in. All entered, except one, the cautious Eurylochus, who sensed something wrong and remained outside. He was right to do so. Inside they were fed and given drink. The mistress of the house was called Circe, a sorceress, a goddess, a daughter of the sun. And when the sailors had eaten their fill, she touched each one with her magic wand and turned them into pigs. The wolves and lions by the fence, former sailors from other ships. Eurylochus ran back to Odysseus and told him everything. Odysseus went alone. He was making his way through the forest when he met a youth, slender, golden-haired. It was Hermes, messenger of the gods. "You are going to Circe," said Hermes. "I know. Here, take this." He held out a white flower with a black root. Eat it, and her spells will have no power over you. And when she moves to strike you with her wand, draw your sword, and she will be afraid. She will ask you to come to her bed. Do not refuse, but first make her swear by the gods that she will do you no harm." Odysseus did exactly as Hermes said. Circe struck him with her wand. Nothing happened. He drew his sword. She was frightened, drew back, swore by the names of the gods. She disenchanted the sailors. They all became men again, and it is said, even more handsome and younger than they had been before. Circe persuaded Odysseus to stay. A year passed on the island of Aea, in feasting, in ease, in the arms of the sorceress. A year without storms, without danger, without the road. Then the sailors came to Odysseus. "Master," said Eurylochus, "we want to go home. Do you remember? Ithaca, Penelope, Telemachus." Odysseus remembered. And again, as with the lotus, he made an effort, shook himself, rose. He asked Circe to release them. "I will let you go," she said. "But first you must travel to a place no living man travels, to Hades, to the kingdom of the dead. There dwells the shade of the prophet Tiresias. Only he can tell you how to find your way home." This was news enough to make any man's heart fail. Descend into the world of the dead, while still living. "Very well," said Odysseus. "Tell me how to get there." Chapter 7. The Gates of Hades. The kingdom of the dead lay at the edge of the world, where the sun never shines, where the rivers are black and the air heavy as earth. Odysseus performed the sacrifice as Circe had instructed. He poured blood into a pit in the ground, and from the pit the shades began to come, insubstantial, gray, wretched. The shades of the dead pressed toward the blood, because blood gave them for a moment the strength to speak. The first to come was the shade of Elpenor, a sailor who had died very recently on Circe's island. He had fallen drunk from a rooftop and broken his neck. He begged to be buried with proper rites, to be given the due honors. Odysseus promised. Then, his mother, Anticlea, his mother, who had died during the years he was at Troy. He had not known. He had not known that she was dead. She approached the blood, and her face grew clear. "Son," she said quietly. "Mother," said Odysseus. The word came strangely to him, as though long forgotten. "You are alive," she said with wonder. "How are you here?" "A long story. How are you? How is father? How is Telemachus? How is Penelope?" "Father is old and grieves for you. He lives on the land, not in the palace, in plain clothes. Telemachus has grown, a good young man. Penelope waits. She waits every day." The shade of his mother paused briefly. "I died of longing for you, son. I waited and died." He tried to embrace her. 3 times he stretched out his arms, and 3 times his arms passed through the shade as through fog. The dead cannot be embraced. He sat and watched the shade of his mother until it dissolved. Then came the shade of Tiresias, the blind old prophet. He drank of the blood and spoke. "Odysseus, you want to go home. Listen, the path is long. On the island of the sun, god Helios graze his sacred cattle. Do not touch them. Do you hear? Do not touch them. If you do, no one will return home. If you restrain yourself, you will return, though late and on a stranger's ship. At home, you will find trouble. Insolent men besieging your wife. Deal with them. And after that, a long life. The shade of Tiresias departed. Odysseus sat by the pit for a long time. Other shades passed by. The great heroes of Troy. Achilles, Ajax, Agamemnon. Each had his own story. Agamemnon told how his own wife had killed him upon his return home. He warned Odysseus to be careful. At last, the shades became too many. They pressed toward the blood, crowding, jostling. Odysseus was afraid, truly afraid for the first time, and ran back to the ship. The oarsmen bent to their oars. The ship sailed away from the shores of death. Part 4. The Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis. Chapter 8. The Singing That Kills. When they returned, Circe explained the next dangers, in detail as an experienced teacher explains a difficult lesson to a student. First, the sirens. Women with birds' wings, seated on rocks among a mountain of bones. They sing, and their singing is more beautiful than anything in the world. It draws ships to the rocks. All who hear it lose their minds, leap into the sea, swim toward the rocks, and perish. No man has ever heard the siren's song and lived. Odysseus wanted to hear it. You cannot, said Circe. You will die. I want to hear it and remain alive. Then have your sailors plug their ears with wax, bind yourself to the mast tightly, so you cannot break free. And whatever you cry out, whatever orders you give, they must not untie you until the rocks are behind you. He did exactly that. As they sailed past the rocks, the sirens began to sing. Odysseus heard and understood why it killed. Not because the singing was loud or piercing. It was soft, tender, such as the voice of the person you love most in all the world. Within it was everything: Ithaca, Penelope, his mother, his childhood, peace, the end of weariness, the promise that if you sail toward that voice, all will be well. At last, well. Odysseus strained at his ropes. He shouted at the sailors to untie him. The sailors could not hear. Their ears were sealed with wax. They only tied the knots tighter, as they had been ordered. The rocks passed alongside. The singing grew fainter. Then it was gone. Odysseus sagged against the mast. The sailors drew the wax from their ears. They untied him. He was silent for a long time, then said, "We sail on." Chapter 9. The Two Monsters. After the sirens, a strait between two monsters. There was no safe passage between them. One could only choose which was less terrible. On one side, Scylla, 6 heads on long necks, in each mouth 3 rows of teeth, in each head 6 pairs of eyes. She sat in a cave in a high cliff and seized whatever passed beneath. On the other side, Charybdis, an enormous whirlpool that 3 times a day swallowed the whole sea and spat it back. To be caught by Charybdis meant death for all. "Keep to Scylla's side," Circe had said. "She will take 6. Charybdis will take all." Odysseus said nothing to the sailors about Scylla. If he had, they would have dropped their oars in terror. He said only, "Keep the hull away from the whirlpool. Row with all your strength." As they passed, Scylla struck. 6 necks lashed over the ship. 6 sailors disappeared into 6 mouths, the best, the strongest, men whose names Odysseus knew. They cried out and called his name as they were carried upward. He saw it, could do nothing, stood and watched. This was the most terrible moment of his journey, not because he would not have survived a fight, but because he knew there was no fighting to be done. There was no stopping it. There was only sailing on and losing men. They cleared the strait. Those who lived were alive. Odysseus did not weep. He would not allow himself, not because he was without feeling, but because if you begin to weep now, you may not stop. And they had to sail on. Chapter 10. The Cattle of the Sun God. Tiresias had warned him. Circe had warned him. Odysseus himself had warned his men. On the island of Helios graze his sacred cattle. They must not be touched. This is the one rule, a single rule. We will take on water, rest, and sail on. The sailors agreed. But the gods sent a headwind. They were stranded on the island. A day, 2 days, a week, a month. The food ran out. Hunger began. The sailors ate grass, caught fish, but fish were scarce. Odysseus prayed, begged the gods for a fair wind. The gods were silent. And then one day, when Odysseus had gone deep into the island to pray and had fallen asleep there from exhaustion, Eurylochus, that same cautious Eurylochus who had not entered Circe's palace, said to the rest, "We are dying of hunger. The cattle are right here. What do we care for the god Helios? If we must die, we will die with full bellies." They killed the cattle, roasted the meat. They feasted. When Odysseus returned and caught the smell of roasting meat, he understood everything. He sat down on the ground and stared at a single point for a long time. Then he rose and walked to the ship. They put to sea as soon as the wind allowed. Helios complained to Zeus. Zeus hurled a thunderbolt at the ship. The ship broke apart. All died. All, except Odysseus, who clung to a fragment of the mast for 2 days while the waves carried him across the open sea. He was alone, the last of all who had sailed with him from Troy. Part 5. Calypso and the Return. Chapter 11. 7 years on the island of endless summer. The waves brought him to the island of Ogygia, to the nymph Calypso. She was beautiful, differently beautiful from Circe, not mysteriously and dangerously, but openly and tenderly. She nursed the solitary, starving, ruined man back to health. She warmed him, fed him, gave him shelter. And she fell in love. 7 years Odysseus lived on her island. The island was like paradise, eternal summer, fruit falling from the trees of its own accord, flowers blooming all year round. Calypso loved him. She offered him immortality, to become a god, to remain with her forever. Odysseus refused. Every day, it is said, he went to the shore and looked at the sea, to the west, toward where Ithaca must be. Simply looked, was silent, grieved the way people grieve when they understand that time is passing and they are standing still. He was alive. He was safe. Neither hunger nor danger threatened him, but he wasn't home. At last, the gods took pity. While Poseidon was visiting the Ethiopians and could not interfere, Zeus sent Hermes to Calypso. "Release him," said Hermes. "Such is the will of the gods." Calypso wept. but arguing with Zeus was impossible. "You will go," she said to Odysseus. "I will give you tools to build a raft. I will tell you how to sail. But no, there are more trials ahead. Do not be overconfident." "I have never been overconfident," answered Odysseus. "You shouted your name to the Cyclops after you had escaped," she reminded him quietly. He said nothing. The raft was ready in 4 days, simple, of thick logs with a small sail. Odysseus looked at it. Not a proud ship, not a trireme, but plain logs, and thought, "It will do. I will get there." Calypso stood on the shore and watched the raft depart. She stood for a long time, until it disappeared over the horizon. The raft sailed for 17 days. Odysseus steered by the stars, barely sleeping. On the 18th day, Poseidon returned from the Ethiopians. He looked at the sea. He saw the raft. "So they let him go after all," he muttered. "No, he raised waves, true waves, such that sky and sea became indistinguishable. The raft was smashed to splinters. Odysseus was flung into the water. The sea nymph Leucothea took pity on him. She gave him her veil, a magic one that would hold him above the water. She said, 'Swim to shore.' For 2 days he swam, without raft, without oar, without anything, simply a man in the sea, with a nymph's veil and the will to live. On the 3rd day, ashore." Chapter 12. The Phaeacians and the Last Ship. This was Scheria, the land of the Phaeacians, seafarers, favorites of the gods. Odysseus crawled onto the shore, buried himself in leaves, and slept. In the morning, a girl came to the shore with her companions to wash clothes. Her name was Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinous. She was young, beautiful, unfrightened. Odysseus emerged from the leaves, naked, crusted with sea salt, terrible to look at, but speaking politely and sensibly. Nausicaa was not afraid. She gave him clothes, fed him, brought him to the palace. King Alcinous received him with honor. He held a feast. He asked Odysseus to tell his story. Odysseus told it. All of it, from beginning to end. Troy, the Cyclops, Circe, Hades, the Sirens, Scylla, the cattle of Helios, Calypso. While he spoke, the hall was silent. Not a single person moved. When he finished, the silence lasted long. "You have suffered much," said Alcinous at last. "We have ships, the swiftest in the world. They will bring you home." Odysseus slept for the last time in a good bed, in a safe place. He slept soundly. The Phaeacian ship set out at night. Odysseus immediately lay down at the stern and fell asleep again. Deeply, peacefully. The oarsmen worked in silence. At dawn, the ship drew up to the shore of Ithaca. The oarsmen carefully carried the sleeping Odysseus onto the shore, laid his gifts beside him, and departed. Odysseus woke on a rock. He opened his eyes. He saw sky, ordinary sky. He heard birds. He smelled something. Grass, earth, sea. Exactly that smell, which had visited him in dreams for 20 years. He did not immediately understand where he was. The goddess Athena, who had always been his protector and who had returned to him, had altered the island's appearance with a mist. Then the mist cleared. "Ithaca," said Odysseus quietly. He fell to his knees and kissed the ground. Part 6. Home, but not. Home. Chapter 13. What had happened in 20 years? 20 years is a very long time. In 20 years, children grow up, parents grow old, houses change, and strangers move in when the master is absent. While Odysseus had been fighting before Troy and wandering the seas, suitors had come to Ithaca. More than 100 noble young men from all the neighboring islands. All of them wished to marry Penelope, because whoever married the widow of Odysseus would become king of Ithaca. They lived in his palace, they ate his stores, they drank his wine, they treated his servants as their own. They looked upon his possessions as their future inheritance. Penelope did not consent. She invented excuses. She said she could not marry until she had woven a funeral shroud for old Laertes. By day she wove, by night she unpicked. This ruse lasted 3 years, until one of her handmaids betrayed her. Now the suitors were demanding an answer. Telemachus, a young man of 20 who had never seen his father, tried to hold firm. He traveled to other cities, seeking news of Odysseus. He told the suitors they were behaving dishonorably. They laughed. Some of them had already begun to think of killing Telemachus, of removing the obstacle. And into all of this, Odysseus returned. Chapter 14. The Beggar in the Palace. Athena advised him, "Don't rush. First learn who can be trusted, and change your appearance." She transformed him, briefly, into an old beggar. Gray-haired, stooped, in rags. He went to his old swineherd Eumaeus. The man did not recognize his master, but received him as an honest man, fed him, gave him shelter, talked with him. The swineherd proved loyal. He cursed the suitors, pitied Penelope, remembered Odysseus with respect. There was such a king here, he said, not knowing with whom he spoke. A good man. I don't know if he's still alive. Then Telemachus came. Athena had directed him here. Odysseus revealed himself to his son. Telemachus looked at the old man. Then Athena lifted the disguise, and before him stood a tall, strong man with dark eyes. "Father?" said Telemachus. His voice was strange, somewhere between belief and disbelief. "Son," answered Odysseus. They embraced, and both wept. Without shame, they simply wept, because 20 years is a very long time, and a reunion after 20 years is worth tears. Then they sat and made a plan. Chapter 15. The Trial of the Bow. Penelope, worn out by waiting and by the pressure of the suitors, announced a competition. "Here is Odysseus's bow," she said. "Whoever strings it and shoots an arrow through 12 axe rings set in a row, that man shall be my husband." It was a cunning plan. She knew that no one but Odysseus could string this bow. It was a special bow, stiff of a particular wood, requiring particular strength and particular skill. The suitors came forward one by one. They strained, red-faced with effort, furious. One dislocated his wrist. Another could barely lift the bow. A third tried to soften the string by the fire. Not one succeeded. In the hall sat an old beggar. He watched in silence. Then he asked, "Allow me to try as well." The suitors laughed. Penelope, who could not see the beggar from where she sat, said, "Let him try." Odysseus took the bow. He examined it as a craftsman examines a familiar tool, attentively, with understanding. He tested the string. He drew it. The bow yielded to him easily, as it yields to its master. The silence in the hall became absolute. He shot. The arrow passed through all 12 rings and struck the wall. Then Odysseus rose, threw back his cloak, and sent a second arrow into the most insolent of the suitors, Antinous, who had just raised his cup. "This is for eating my bread and besieging my wife," he said. This was the beginning of the reckoning. Chapter 16. The Reckoning and the Recognition. The battle in the hall was brief. The suitors cast about searching for weapons. Telemachus had removed all weapons from the hall beforehand, leaving only a few swords for his own men. The door was locked. There was no way out. Odysseus shot with his usual precision. A small hall, 100 people in panic. This was not a battle, but a hunt. He felt no joy. Only the cold execution of what had to be done. When it was over, he ordered the dead removed and the hall put in order. Then he had Penelope summoned. She came down carefully. She looked at the man by the hearth, tall, without the beggar's cloak, washed in proper clothes. Something in her recognized him, but she did not believe at once. "You could be anyone," she said. "Plenty of men know how to shoot a bow." "Penelope," said Odysseus with a slight smile. "You haven't changed." A man who wishes to deceive a woman always says flattering things. "Then I will tell you something particular." He paused. "Do you remember our bed? I made it myself, from a living olive tree that grows at the center of our house. Its roots have grown into the foundations. The bed cannot be moved elsewhere, not without felling the tree." Penelope went pale. Then she rose. Then she took a step toward him. Only he could have known this. Only he could ever have known. She did not weep. She simply embraced him tightly, with arms that had spent 20 years weaving and unpicking, waiting and hoping. He held her and thought, this is it. He was home. This was not a dream. 30 years, youth, war, the sea, monsters, islands, gods. All of it had ended here, in this room, in this embrace. They stood for a long time. Then Penelope raised her head and looked at him. "You've grown very thin," she said. Odysseus laughed. The laughter came of its own accord, light, real, human. "You haven't changed at all," he said.